All right. Well, welcome, Blueprint Church. I wish I could come here saying that I am like excited, happy, rejoicing, all that. I mean, truth be told, I am in the clothes that I slept in. You know, I've been one of the main people who say, get up, put on clothes, all that. And today, really, I felt the opposite. I just felt like sackcloth and ashes. I don't know, just I was unmotivated in lots of ways. And obviously, it has to do with just the city of Atlanta, and what happened to Rashard Brooks a couple days ago. And again, it's just another reminder. And I think what has grieved me even so, that if we are still so quick, I would hate to be a cop at this time. Let me just kind of say that. I would hate to be a cop because you're asked to continue to protect right now and serve in a time where people don't like you, right? And you go out each day in your life. So let me just confess that. But the thing that I'm grieving, is that the reality of this is that we are in the middle of policing and all that, and we are still having to mourn the death of Black men in the midst of it, and it just it impacted me. It is impacting me. I was up late last night, early this morning, and just asking for God to give wisdom, give grace, and so I don't know. That's kind of just my early thoughts. I mean, and I put on the post in the chat today as the service was going on. I just went we had this conversation. We usually record on Friday afternoons. So we had this conversation before any of this this new development has taken place. So we didn't have that as a backdrop. But just to see even from what Friday afternoon to Sunday morning, there's another hashtag, another headline, another dead Black man, another, and I'm just I don't want to have the conversation about racism. I don't want I don't feel like we need to be arguing about whether there's racism or not, whether there's I don't want to have those conversations. But I'm also just kind of my mama used to always tell me, if you ain't got nothing good to say, don't say anything at all. And in a lot of ways right now, I don't have much good to say. And so I'm really gonna let you guys do the speaking today, because I don't have much good to say. But I also still know that God has called me to a standard. And so that's just, what are you guys' thoughts? I mean, how has this impacted you even from we just started 2 days ago to now? I mean, what's impacting? What are your thoughts on everything?
I will say that what we're seeing and what we did see this weekend alone, literally, like you said, we recorded on Friday and then these things happen. But this just shows how pervasive this problem is. It is not something that every once in a while, it is so problematic. And at some level, even those who are, and it always is politicized, the Democrats. Somebody just posted, I just shared the watch party for the service this morning, and somebody literally commented and said the Democrats try to make this a race issue and this and that. And the bottom line is it's sin. Why is it so hard to call it what it is? It's sin. It's a disregard for God's creation. We're all created in God's image, but we're not all treated like we are created in God's image. And so to just disregard it and literally make it political when we just talked about this is not a political issue shows you how pervasive this is and how sickening this is, that as Americans and Christians who are doing their best to speak out against the injustice and to speak against the sin, and you get slapped in the face with, sorry, this is just political. This is the Democrats. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem. That's a problem. Mm-hmm. And like we said, the heart wants to say, I am not doing this anymore. I'm not talking about this. Lord, just come back. Take us all. I want to go to heaven, and I'm done. I can't do anymore.
Yeah,
until. Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say it's just it's interesting because as I was even thinking about it, I woke up this morning. We're halfway through the year. And we've already seen multiple black men die at the hands of vigilantes and police officers.
And black women.
And black women, yes, Breonna Taylor and black women, right? And then I think I forgot the exact quote or statement, and I don't know the exact statement, but someone quoted that in 2018 or 2019, 9 unarmed black men, and I don't know if it's black men or black women, was also killed. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, what's interesting is that, yes, it seems like this year is being brought more to the surface, but this is the normal. Like, we're right on pace to continue on with American history. You know, if last year or if it was in 2018 or 2019, 9 unarmed African Americans were killed, that's kind of the pace that we're on right now for this year, you know, and it's just, I don't know. It really bothers me. It really, really bothers me.
I wanted to speak to someone, you know, Derwin, you said that somebody said Democrats always try to make, you know, they're politicizing race or whatever. So when I frame this, I don't want people to think that I'm trying to make it a political issue. But this week there were high-ranking officials who literally came out and said systemic racism does not exist in America. You know, these are like your attorney general. These are not like local leaders. These are national leaders who say, in the midst of all that's happening, systemic racism no longer exists in America. I want to make sure I'm not echoing. Okay,
if Sam is near you, Tina, tell Sam to go into another room or somebody, because we could hear the echo in the other thing. I know you. And if everybody else can just, like, if you're not talking, just mute, because I don't know where it's coming from. But yes, I do hear it.
Okay. Is it? I don't know if it's better.
Yeah.
Okay. So hearing that in the midst of all that we're negotiating is incredibly disheartening. And actually, I was listening to an Instagram Live this week because I needed perspective. And the speaker mentioned Jeremiah, I think it's Jeremiah 6:14. I think, Dahadi, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm just loosely quoting, but they dressed our wounds as if they weren't serious. And then later, they called peace when there was no peace. We are called to be peacemakers. But, you know, when you dress our wounds as if they're not serious, that's what this is. You know, when you're saying peace when there is no peace, justice is a prerequisite for peace. And so when our brothers and sisters, our white or black or whoever, brothers and sisters are saying there is no systemic racism, and they're saying we should be the peacemakers and we should be calling for peace, it is a slap in the face. It is adding insult to injury when you do not mete out justice, but you expect peace. Justice is a prerequisite for peace. It's a part of peace. That's interpersonally, that's spiritual. God understood that. You know, God understood that someone had to pay for our sins. So justice had to be done for us to have peace with him. And that's interpersonally, that's systemically, that's nationally. Like, I feel like there's such a press for us to just push this under the rug, for us to just get this settled, and people are still dying. And, you know, you quoted those statistics. We don't know. You know what I mean? This is racism I don't know that racism is getting worse. That Will Smith, I think, said like 2 weeks ago, racism is not getting worse. It's being filmed. Right? So there is another black man came out this week, you know, a film. I can't remember his name right now off the top because brain fart. But he had cardiac arrest. Again, another black man saying, I can't breathe, and ended up dying at the hands of a police officer. And I was like, wow, this was March of 2020. And my friend was like, no, that was March of 2019. The footage is just coming out a year later. This is, I mean, you know, we are in a place where you can't call for peace if there is no real move toward justice. And we as believers have to ask ourselves, what is our part in justice? It may look different for different people, but we have to have that conversation with ourselves. We have to have a conversation in the church. We have to have that conversation with God, because if you are talking about fatigue and if you're talking about an outcry, we need to cry out at home first. First, we need to cry out in the church and have a conversation in the church about complicit silence about asking us to sit back and settle for injustice and our dignity being stripped. We have to have that conversation in the church. It's a tough conversation, but as believers, I believe we can have it.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, imagine the luxury of seeing what happened yesterday as an isolated incident, and I think that's what grieves me so much, is that for some of my brothers and sisters, they see this and they're just like, another one. Some of my brothers and sisters see this and say another one, and they're not grieved at all. They're in a place of apathy. Some of my brothers and sisters see this and they just say, oh, well, he should have did this. He should have complied. He should have. And to Pastor Dahadi's point, just sitting with it. Like, it's so heavy. It's so heavy for me because I didn't watch the footage. I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know Georgia law. I don't know if this is justified shooting. I'm not even getting into that. To be frank, I don't care. And for me, I think it weighs so heavy. I got pulled over on Friday. It literally leaving the recording, I got pulled over. And it was totally my fault. So I'm not saying by any means, it was a driving while black incident. No, I ran a red light. I deserve to get pulled over. Even though I think the person in front of me should have got pulled over too, because they was driving too slow through the yellow light, but that's besides the point. So I get pulled over, easy exchange. I could tell the officer was nervous, white guy, but not nervous in an antsy way, but nervous in some I understand the times. Let me just get your ticket. I got other things to do. You got other things to do. Let's just make this as smooth as possible. And I was speaking to some friends, and I'm so afraid to watch the video because if it's the same cop, and I know that the eyes are slim or small or whatever, but if it's the same cop, I don't know what I'm going to do. If it's the same cop that pulled me over that actually shot this man, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I hate that I even have to wrestle with that. It's 2020. You know what I mean? Like, we can name case after case going all the way back to slavery. At least one case a year going all the way back to slavery, where we're dealing with social injustice, systematic racism. And I think I'm beyond, or I don't think, I know I'm beyond the point of putting racism on trial. Does racism exist? If we're having that conversation in 2020, I really pray for the heart of the person I'm speaking to. Because, and I mean that, I don't mean that lightly. I mean that as a believer, you are my brother and you are questioning the grieving hearts of your brothers and sisters. Where's the empathy? Where's the compassion? And as Pastor Derwin said when we were off camera on Friday, in order to empathize, you have to have empathy. And just to understand that we, within the body, we would rather argue with each other than to try to step into the shoes of each other. This is beyond, to quote some vernacular here, it's beyond me. It is, I don't understand it, and I don't think that it is something that can be understood. And I do feel like the sackcloth and ashes mode, I feel like I can only turn to God, because I am that level of frustrated. If I try to do anything in my own strength, I definitely know that I'm working out of pride. I'm working out of frustration. I'm working out of anger, and not the righteous anger, but I'm just pissed off.
Right. And I think that's spot on. And I would love to hear what you guys are thinking on Facebook Live. We would love to interact with you. What are your comments? What are you feeling? How are you lamenting? How does this situation bring itself up again from us just having a conversation on Friday to today? It's like if we would have been recording this Saturday evening, or if we would have been doing this live, this would have been, it would have been a completely different conversation. One, because the idea of, it is now at our front doorstep. There's members at our church that live less than a mile away from where this incident is happening. There are members in our church that literally saw Rayshard an hour before, actually being shot. Like literally saw him, in Wendy's, in the parking lot with his car, just there. So it's just so we're talking about now this being on our front doorstep, as a church, and it is something that is like God, our cry out is a cry out of not just voice, but it is one of action, And that's what we've always like using and utilizing every platform that we have, but coming up against, okay, what do we do? What do we do? I mean, let me ask you guys, do you take this in the same vein as the other ones, or is there something unique about Rayshard? And I mean, it's not a loaded question. How do you, look into this? And again, what do you guys think on Facebook Live? But go ahead. Wow, what do you guys think about that?
I think it is different. It's the entire world is seeing what's taking place. A lot of it is because of coronavirus and pandemic, but literally protests happening because of the racial injustice, specifically in America, worldwide. And in the middle of the protests for the racial injustice and the police shootings and police brutality, primarily against black men, a black man gets killed from a police officer. And if those people, the people who would say this doesn't exist, you guys are making this up, it's political rhetoric, it is political divisiveness. If now you cannot see that this is real, and the outcry from your brothers and sisters, specifically Christians, your brothers and sisters' outcry has been, yeah, that's just your experience, and you don't want to do what Jesus said when he says, mourn with those who mourn. I don't know how you can literally look at what's taking place and dismiss it.
Yeah.
I mean, and the sad thing is that the go-to is, well, but what was he doing? What was his upbringing?
Yeah, and now, but Derwin, but the thing is now we're saying, like, now we get the video, it's like, but there was stuff that happened before and what happened. Like, it's like, it doesn't matter because there's like either, like, I still need more. Like, we caught all this on tape. I still need more. Like, what happened 2 minutes before, we got the video. But the other thing about this is very interesting that it's like, in like where the George Floyd and even it's like people are around and it's like cops and they have like video, like I'm recording you, but it doesn't change the behavior at all.
Not at all.
And so
And I wanted to say, I think the word systemic is indicative of pervasive. If something is in a system, that means you won't see it in isolated incidents. What we're seeing is a moment captured by video, several moments captured on video that outrage people. But what we have to understand, if something is systemic, if racism is systemic, it is woven throughout everything, right? It's woven throughout all of our structures. And I said this in our time, guys, on Friday, and I want to say it now. We keep talking about, structural racism, systemic racism, and that we have a broken system. We do not in America have a broken system. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was designed to work. It was designed, and I'm saying this to, I see some pushback from people saying, is there really systemic racism? Why are you saying there's still systemic racism? Because the system was designed to advantage some and to disadvantage others based on the color of our skin. And so what we're seeing now is the actual manifestation of that. Yeah. And I don't know, it's just, That's good. Feels like, I don't know.
No, and I think that's spot on, Tina. Let's hear some of the questions and comments that you guys are on here because people are interacting and engaging, and that's how I wanted us to honor the thought because this is all of our platforms to cry out. Patsy says this about, says, what about black men that are being found hung in a tree and there is not enough outcry to do a real investigation before dismissing it as suicide? It goes back to what Tina was saying about how our powers and our country screaming that systemic racism doesn't exist and people who don't want to deal with racism can use that to dismiss things like this and run away. So, I mean, so she's agreeing with that, but it's even on multiple, like, what about things that we're seeing that, but what about the unsolved? It's like we have to be in the perfect scenario, perfect scene, see all the video footage, all the tape, all the, in order to get type of outrage.
It's ridiculous.
And it's interesting because I was watching the press conference last night with the lawyer for Mr. Brooks, and he was saying, this is eerily similar to other cases, like literally eerily similar to other cases that he has had to be a part of. But the thing he was saying is, let's look at if this had been a white college student, a fraternity boy who was drunk and who was in his car. Let's look at the footage before that where it's like, hey, you had too much to drink, you okay? Let's put you in an Uber. Would that be how that played out as opposed to how this played out? I think that the thing that sometimes people realize is that there is, when something is systemic, and I meant to say this before, but I completely lost the thought. When there is systemic racism, when there is systemic bias, and the way we are all born into sin, we in the natural here in America are born into a white supremacist culture, and it infiltrates the way we think, the way we perceive. When you see white skin, as I want to preface this by saying, can we just get it on the table? We know all cops aren't bad. Like, let's just say that, because every time you come back at us with a but, every time you come back at us with a rebuttal, when someone is dead, an innocent, unarmed man is dead, it injures us all over again. So let's just put that on the table. We know all cops are not bad, but if this is happening all over, then there's a call for systemic reform. When it comes to the way a situation would escalate if a person is white, as opposed to the way the situation would go if a person is brown or black.
So, Tina, how do you differentiate the two? Because that's what Scott Floyd says this. Yeah. I have a lot of anxiety every time I see cops, but I know every cop is not bad. So how can we differentiate? Because of, I mean, that's what people do. That's what the cops are doing, right? They see a black man and then they begin to project, they begin to generalize, they begin to discriminate. So what are the ways beyond that? We don't project, we don't discriminate, to taking that all cops are bad. So how do we quarantine or individualize people?
If I can speak, and I know I'm talking a lot, so you guys just cut in over me. But on a personal level, if you're not seeing that, if you're not seeing the difference between how black and brown are treated between white people, not even just in cop stops, we're talking about medical bias, we're talking about home loans, we're talking about everything. It infiltrates everything. The first thing you have to do on a personal level is re-educate yourself, is to tear down. Racism is a construct. It's not, superiority for one skin color against another is a construct. It's not real. And so, but we have been educated in this country to believe that it's real, even if it's not explicitly said in our history books, in our media, and what we're seeing on television. Those biases are constantly being fed into our psyche. On a personal level, you have to deconstruct that. You have to tear, the same way the Bible tells us to tear those things down, we have to tear those things down in the natural. Systemically, we need reform.
Yeah, and I think one thing, sorry, Tina. Yeah, I mean, when you're preaching, you know what I'm saying, all I want to do is span you. I ain't got nothing else for you. But I think, too, when you have to realize that the same way that we talk about being 2, maybe 3 generations removed from slavery, though our white brothers and sisters are 2 to 3 generations from seeing black people as property. And if we don't realize that on the steps in Missouri, in St. Louis, where I'm from, that I love, that's tattooed on my body, you see that people are like literally Dred Scott case, 3/5 of a man was decided there. And this isn't some super far back in history, because that same mentality has perpetuated over the years. Now, to answer Scott's question directly, how do we overcome or how do we humanize the individual? It's so tough because, and I know, Pastor Dahadi, you talked about this, like when you see a cop, you see those flashing lights, you go into protocol. I'm talking, when I got put up on Friday, legal citizen, both hands out the window, car, all windows rolled down, you know what I'm saying, my car shut off. I'm going through this protocol that I have been taught because, you know what, if I make any false move, I need to grab my wallet. Officer, is it okay for me to grab my wallet? I don't want you to think anything. And I think the hardest thing for me to do is to individualize, because I have had jerks for cops. I have had cops looking for an excuse. And I have had cops that literally are just trying to make it home. And that's all they're trying to do. And in those moments, I think that you have to weigh those moments, but also, like, we cannot discount the power of prayer and the power of the Holy Spirit. And I don't mean that as a cop-out. I don't mean that as a secondary solution. Lord, you know the heart of the person that's walking up to my car right now. Lord, you know the heart of the people that are coming into this building right now. Please, Holy Spirit, do something with their heart, because if they are coming in with any type of vitriol or any type of malice, any type of ill intent, Lord, you have to deal with that, because I'm okay. I grew up in the hood. I'm okay. I'm telling you. Right. I grew up in the hood and I believe in Jesus. So at any moment, I'm okay with it. Right. And so, but I also understand that there's another person on the other side that the Lord is still going to use.
And as someone who has faced multiple times of police brutality, me individually, I know I had to go through a process when there was used to be a cop that used to go to our church, and I had to go to him, and we had conversations, because I said, listen, when you put on that uniform, it does something to me, and so for us to think through that, I think there needs to, like we said, I don't know if there needs, because there's training, there needs to be training on all sides, and it's like, how do we not project on everyone.
It's so interesting, because I think that there's been a whole bunch of controversy this week because people started talking about defunding the police. And of course, as soon as we said, people say defund the police, it's like, whoa, you can't defund the police. And this is not a political conversation, but just looking at reform and how that can actually play out. When we talk about reform, looking at it, and people often say, what does that even look like? When you look at the city of Camden, New Jersey, and how they literally tore their complete police department down and restructured. They're at a cellular level, there is racism and there's discrimination. And that kind of, it's not that there aren't any policemen, it's not that they're not policing their community. They've all been retrained on how to interact with the community and on how to even handle situations that could escalate. And
I think that's a great example of what's going on in Camden, because I do want to talk to whoever the marketer for the defunding the police is, because again, it's not talking about just simply taking money away from this area, but it's about reallocating it to the appropriate places, thinking about a system. But when people just think defunding, they just think about taking money. Because in that article, I read an article about what's going on in Camden, and is when they start taking away the money, even the people who started off this system was frustrated. It was like, it's not about tax cuts and funding, it's about reallocating it. Again, I'm hearing feedback, you guys. So we just, so Corbin says this, he says, white evangelicals who don't empathize with where things are and don't admit that there being systematic issues are no different than the Jews and Romans, are no different than Jews and Romans government that didn't want their peace or discomfort disrupted. All right, I'm sorry, let me say this one more time. The white evangelicals who don't empathize with where things are and don't admit to there being systematic issues are no different than the Jews and the Roman government that didn't want their peace or comfort disrupted. Yeah. So I mean, it's because it's, again, like if we was in a society that said, no, there's, like China or something, like, no, we're government and we're going to oppress our people, or not China. Let me take that back. If we were not in a democratic society, if we did not have equality of all human beings, if our Constitution didn't say anything, it's one thing that our Constitution is saying something, that we don't live in a kingdom and a matriarch where there's one sovereign. We don't live in, this is a completely different society, and there's a lot of inconsistencies. And that's, again, why I think what in Galatians is so critical, because, listen, they had their Jerusalem council, and they all said, we're going to treat the Jews and the Gentiles all the same, equality and all those things. But immediately after that, there was a but. But Peter wasn't living in line of that. That statement, that Constitution, that thing that we drew up, he's not living in line, by the way, which is a gospel issue. And I think that, again, is for us as believers, that we got to keep calling people back to our Constitution, to not the American Constitution, but also to biblical.
This is what you said as the founder. And the thing that's interesting is When you look at other countries that have had, when you look at Rwanda, you know, when you look at what happened in Rwanda with the huge genocision, from the top, there was healing. There was a call recognizing we can't just legislate this. There has to be healing. There were structures and organizations and programs put in place to heal the divide between the groups that were warring against each other. Here in America, and I just want to paint this picture very clearly, there has never been an actual repentance for this country's original sin of slavery. So if there's no actual acknowledgement, which is honestly what we're hearing from when people push back and say there's not systemic racism, when people push back with their butt and their rebuttal, that is the same. That is the manifestation of a country that has never reconciled the original sin.
So in the chat, somebody's asking specifically to your point, Tina, about systemic racism. They're asking very specifically. He says, can you be specific on what is systemic? Like, I think they're asking, because you already talked about systemic, what systemic means, but they're asking specifically, I guess, give an example. Like, take one, if somebody can, like, one thing when we're talking about systemic, because like you said, we had some of our officials who told us that there's no such thing. So what is a specific? Give us an example.
Okay, I'm gonna give. You can almost pluck them from the air, you know, because it's so pervasive. I'm going to give an example of systemic racism that has nothing to do with cops, because I think we get fixated on that. When this is an example, let's say that there is a Black woman or a Hispanic woman, a brown woman who comes into a doctor's office and says, these are my symptoms, and they are not heard, or they are treated in a way that doesn't actually deal with the root, doesn't get to the root of what's happening. And a white woman comes into the doctor's office and says the exact same thing, and they are actually treated. They're got the root of what is going on is gotten to. We see medical bias all the time. We see it in home loans. You know, we see it in college admissions. We see it everywhere. I mean, I don't.
And I think one of the things is the very simple. The simple thing is, like what we saw even in the 13th, but we've known the idea of cocaine, crack. Cocaine, yeah. Like a substance in its powder form that is more in the affluent, had a lesser sentence than in its liquid form. Same substance in its liquid form brought a greater criminalization to minority communities than it was. Same substance, but being totally different things. So that is part of systemic racism.
Pastor, one thing that I don't have my comments up, so I'm not sure who asked that question. But if you want to example, study what crack cocaine did to the Black community, because there was no boats, there was no shipping. Literally, I have friends that lived in LA during the time that was really out here in these streets. They said that they would just find cars, train cars, full of guns. And so somebody would get a message like, hey, it may or may not be some guns over there. And they will go, and it's just a train car full of guns. These automatic weapons didn't just happenstance, they just didn't come into these neighborhoods. Also, if you really want to dive in, and I love a question like that, look at redlining. Look at the history of redlining. If you want to study that, look at the history of welfare. If you really want to study what systematic injustices does, if I can speak to welfare for 1 second or multiple, that when you have people that are coming back from war, don't have a job, all the jobs that were centered in the city, in the urban areas, were moved out to the suburbs. There's no transportation. Public transportation doesn't go out there. So now you strip all of the economic wealth from an area, and then you tell people that cannot make any money based on their skills, because all they have are labor skills, and bless all of my tradesmen out there, that you tell them that they can't work because they can't get a ride out there every single day for work. Then you say, we'll give you free money, but a man cannot be in a household. And so then you remove the man from the household, and now you literally are only given, if I am faced as a father with feeding my child and not being there, or being there and not feeding my child, I'm going to go with feeding my child every single time. So when you hear this notion of Black men are not in a home, which of course you have 3 Black men here that debunk that myth anyway, but you have to go back to the source, that Black men were coming back from war with no jobs. And this is the only way for them to feed their family. They cannot, like, even the article, for some of my people that grew up under the welfare system, they understand that those house checks that happened back in the 60s, in the 70s and 80s, not even an article of men's clothing could be found in the household, or you would not get your check. So when you think about this type of stuff and perpetuate it over year and continuous year after year after year, there's some great books on systematic injustices. One I would definitely push you to read is White Rage. That is one of the best books on systematic injustices, because we can even go back to the number 17th president, Andrew Johnson, that literally said that 40 acres and a mule that you were going to get, since I grew up as a poor white man in the country of Tennessee, black people don't deserve it.
Right.
And so, but we made this country. Literally everything, the reason why people, ex-slaves were getting emancipated people, because I hate calling them slaves like they had a choice. Emancipated people were getting even the 40 acres and a mule was simply because the government realized, oh snap, they built everything for this country and they're going out and they're free. Millions and millions of people are free with no type of economic structure. So let's give them a start, 40 acres and a mule.
Yeah.
And I would say if that's a serious question, like if someone asked that question in earnest, that is a step one question, meaning no, us having this conversation today is not going to make you believe that there is systemic racism. And I would recommend like White Rage, White Fragility, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Like the work is not going to be done watching us on Facebook.
That's right.
The work is digging into materials that begin to deconstruct fallacy, systemic fallacy. That is a step one question that was asked. And step two is to start digging into the resources that we've been talking about here, like those books, like the documentary The 13. Those are some good resources. That's a step one question. Step two would be for you to start doing the work.
But Tina, allow one of the steps to be watching Facebook Live.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, you just kind of threw me all out the steps. You just threw all Facebook Live, these discussions, like, out the steps. Like, if that's step one, and this ain't gonna help, okay.
I want to add to what Chris and Tina both said in regards to, the reality of the systemic racism. So now, whoever asked that question, now that you've heard this and you realize about the welfare system and how it was set up and what it has perpetuated, now that you have heard this and you realize, oh, wow, that I never knew that. Can you see that construct that was put in place is the problem that we still deal with today? So it's not, we cannot say anymore people are going to war and this and that, but it was put into place to do something very specific, and it is still doing that. So until we address how can we truly reform the welfare system, how do we do that? Right. Well, we have to deconstruct what was constructed to marginalize and to keep people in their place and keep them dependent on a system. And then you go into redlining where literally people are, and you can say forced or not, but forced to live in certain areas until the area is now appealing for others. And they say, no, we want to come back there. And now you're forced to go back out. We're going to give you some money so that you can potentially get housing, but then you don't have proper job, proper credit score, so you're left destitute. And we've seen that right here in Atlanta big time after the Olympics and all of that.
You see that right here in the Fourth Ward. I mean, we're living proof of that reality taking place going on. Let's get back to some of the comments. Holly has a long one. She says, the morning after Rayshard was killed, there was another man detained in Atlanta for driving around drunk after nearly killing two individuals by way of vehicular manslaughter. He was white. I watched footage of APD peacefully detain him and sit him on a bench for a stern conversation. I'm not legal professional, but it seems obvious that Rayshard's situation didn't warrant lethal force. Instead of calling the police, someone could have woken him up or even called a tow truck. For goodness sake, Tina's right. This system appears irredeemable at this point. And then Michael basically says, I'm not denying it, but asking to focus on something versus everything. So basically the reason why Michael was asking is like, let's focus on something versus saying everything, which I think is, to some degree, is a good point because of the fact that, like, if you look at King's era and King's day, it wasn't when he would go in, and that was part of King's strategy. Let's talk about busing system. Let's talk about, sanitation. Let's talk about voting. And when he would go in, he would, instead of, to your point, Tina, that instead of kind of hitting racism as a whole, because it's so pervasive, let's deal with the manifestations of it so that we can deal, hopefully address the heart of it. But being able to name certain things and certain injustices gives us something specific to address it. Right now, we hear things like the 8 can't wait. We hear things, about defunding, demilitarizing, the police. Some of the things that you even brought up, Tina, like where people are addressing some of the things that you talk about, notable changes of like the Confederate flag, symbols of racism, addressing things. And so what are certain things that we can hone in so it's not like there's a demon in every bush kind of mentality?
I mean, I think the essence of the word systemic is that it is pervasive, so it's not that when someone says, it's not everything, systemic means it actually is everything. And I think that we are right now focusing on something specific because we're having a conversation around police brutality. So that's the specific thing that we're talking about right now. We're specifically talking about police reform. So I think that is what's driving this particular conversation. That's what's driving this particular revolution of mind and thought that we see right now. So I think that is the specific thing we're talking about. But we can't think that we can just address police brutality. It's like if you have cancer in your whole body and you say, well, I'm going to amputate, from the knee down. Cancer's still in the rest of the body. You know what I mean? So I do understand what they're saying. And we are talking about police brutality specifically right now. But if we don't get to the heart of racism, then we will put some laws on the books. We'll change a few things, we'll reform a few things. But it's like I was saying before, racism is throughout the entire body. So I think that it's going to be personal. On a personal level, it's going to be all of us because, again, we are all born into a white supremacist culture. And if you push back or defend just on the thought that this is a white supremacist culture, that's the first thing. So we are all injured by that. White people, you're injured by that. You are misinformed the same way we are misinformed. You've been traumatized. This not in the same way that we've been traumatized. It's traumatizing to live in a culture that pits us against one another this way. So on a personal level, it's re-educating ourselves. As churches, it is us speaking truth, which is sometimes not happening. Speaking truth to how we solve these problems. And interpersonally, it is us being not just in proximity with people who don't look like us, but in friendship. In deep friendship where we can have honest conversations and begin to deconstruct our ideas about our misconceptions about one another. So,
and to dive in for a second, we have the Holy Spirit. And I don't know if it was Mike or Micah that you said, but you have the Holy Spirit, bro. And, to pray and ask God, what can I do with the privilege that I have? What can I do with the resources that I have to actually make a change? Because if I'm not seeing this or if I'm not experiencing this, then Lord, you need to reveal to me, because you can ask 1,000 Black people and get 1,000 different answers. Yeah. I likened it, and I told the panel here, I likened it to a forest. We need to clear the forest. All right, I'm going to start on this tree. Well, I'm going to start on this tree. Like, we don't need to focus on the same tree per se. We need to clear this forest, and this forest is social injustice, and it is systematic racism. And so, whichever way the Lord moves you, because you have time, talent, and treasures that I may not have, and the Lord will move you in a specific direction. However, waiting on one person to say this is the direction is going to create a personality-driven mission, which is going to fall as soon as that person falls. And we can't allow for that. This is a God issue. This is not a skin issue. And if we're not seeking God on a God issue, then we'll always have pride being the root of us trying to eradicate anything. So we can't allow that to continue on.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's good.
Well, and I was going to say, one thing you were talking about, like as believers, in a context of church, of faith, is we can't, worldly sorrow is not going to fix this. Where something has made you feel guilty, where this particular incident has pricked your conscience and then you go on with your life. We have to get to godly sorrow. We have to get to the place where we hurt because this is something that hurts God. Because if we don't get there, again, it's performative. It is me putting Black Lives Matter, on my Facebook profile. It is me posting on Instagram that I'm reading how to be an anti-racist. We're not looking for performance. We are looking for heart transformation. And that is not something that happens just because another unarmed black man was killed and everybody's upset and then it goes to something else. We as the body of Christ have to get to the point where this is a godly sorrow and it's something that we feel as strongly about as any other sin, as any other thing that we campaign about, that we, advocate for. If this isn't as sorrowful to you, then that's an issue. And if we don't have it, we won't have lasting change. We haven't had lasting change because this hasn't been collectively godly sorrow. And worldly sorrow looks like guilt. White guilt is useless. If we as Black people do not want you as white people to feel guilty, we want you to examine where you might have privilege. Because privilege, I don't want you to feel bad because you have privilege. I want you to figure out I have privilege? I didn't even realize that. How can I leverage it for my brothers and sisters?
Here are two things.
Hold on, Derwin, again. Whoever, please mute. Is Sam in the same room as you, Tina?
No, he's not.
Okay.
I turned my phone off and Sam is nowhere near me.
Okay.
Two things that came to mind as we're talking through all of this in regards to those who won't see that this is a gospel issue or cannot see that their brothers and sisters are hurting is, number one of the reasons that I know that this exists is not from experience. It's because my parents told me, look out for this, look out for that, be mindful of that, you're going to be treated differently, yada, yada, yada. Because they experienced things and they were told things and they were warning me as their child that you're going to face these things. I didn't experience anything yet, but I was told. Now I experience, and I have experienced the getting pulled over and being called boy so many times in a conversation that you're just blown away, and all the things that your father told you how to behave and what to do and what to say and don't move. And you're literally, you leave the situation and you're in tears because you're so frightened and maddened and you don't know what to do. So I've experienced both sides, being educated, the education, and now the experience. For those who have not been educated and have not experienced, they are blinded to the fact that this is here. And so what God has called me to do is to speak to the blind, is literally help them open their eyes. God, you have given me rapport with brothers and sisters who don't look like me, talk like me, act like me, dress like me. So therefore, what do? I allow my grief and my situation to be a voice, and hopefully they will hear. Hopefully they will do what the Bible says when it says to mourn with those who mourn. But because they have not been educated and they have not experienced, they are blind and they are deaf.
Yeah, that's
and
really
I
good.
really believe that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So Jonathan says this. He says, the Rayshard situation isn't the same as George, but there's nothing unique about Rayshard's situation. There is a fundamental difference between the way the police address disorderly conduct with people of color. What Rayshard was doing was immaterial. We need to understand that the police are an idol that was put in place to protect the interests of white mainstream culture over the past 100 years. The police were designed to escalate and subdue black bodies and people of color to protect the mainstream interests. So, to threaten the police as they exist anywhere, including inner cities and in black communities, is to threaten the security of white suburbia and redlined neighborhoods. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well, first off, shout out to Jonathan, SWAT MC all day, or City Group all day. And shout out to Scott too. Yeah, like you're talking, when I just named me, Scott, and Jonathan, we are all kids from the Midwest. That it sounds like, oh, moving down south is going to be, I remember moving to Alabama where I went to undergrad, thinking that it was going to be more racist because of what I saw in pictures and all this type of stuff. St. Louis, where I'm from, Chicago, where Jonathan's from, Michigan, Grand Rapids, where Scott is from. We have seen such segregation our entire lives, literally being told you can't come home. I was told by police, 7 police officers, don't come back to our neighborhood when I was a kid, when I was like 16. And I was just sitting there like, all right. But when you think about that and you think about that this is a disruption and this is why outrage is so real, because to ask for equality makes someone that is above, that has privilege, feel like they're losing something. But at the end of the day, it's just equality. And I can't, and by no means do I petition to the heart of someone that doesn't call themselves a child of God, because I understand that there takes an inner working of the Holy Spirit to even speak to you. If you call yourself my brother by the Holy Spirit, by the renewing of ourselves in the Holy Spirit, we are new creatures. So if you say that you are a child of God and this does not grieve you, I really would question your prayer time, how you're allowing the Lord to actually condition your heart. Because the same way that as a black man, I may see this, it's the same way that a black woman or a woman, period, may see sexism. Yes, there are things that I do not experience because I have privilege. But when a sister brings this to me as a child of God, please listen, I'm not saying just in the good nature. I don't care if you're a good person or not, because we're all trash at the end of the day outside of what Christ did on that cross. So if we are not saying that, you know what, let me see where I have pride has allowed to creep in, where all these different socioeconomic structures have allowed to creep in, if I don't examine that versus what God is calling me to do, then I'm dropping the ball every single time. And if I'm frank about it, I'm tired of black people being told to follow the Bible and our white brothers and sisters being an excuse for it. And historically, I have seen that happen time and time again. Black people, you need to submit. Even if you look back at MLK Jr., Martin Luther King Jr., when you look back at him, his biggest call out was against the Vietnam War. Why? Because he said, you're asking me to be nonviolent, you're asking my people to be nonviolent, but then we're at war. How does that equate? And you see this time and time again. And I'm not saying that they're like, and the beautiful thing and the reason why I love Blueprint so much is because our doctrine simply states there is no black and white in Christ. There is no Jew nor Gentile. There is no male nor female. What does that mean? Equality across the board, because we are all children of God. We are all co-heirs, period, with Jesus Christ. And if we cannot lay down our privilege, we cannot lay down our skin tone, we cannot lay down our socioeconomic standings in order to follow Christ, that, my friend, is called an idol.
Amen. Yeah, that's powerful. That is a powerful statement. And so and I think a lot of times what we have is people perpetuating anti-vision and just very little vision. Very little. Everybody is really good at saying what's wrong, but like being able to paint kind of a vision. And that's why I love what you guys are talking about. You're painting vision. You're painting kind of something, a preferred future, more than it's just simply only tearing down the what's wrong. But it's just like, here's a different preferred future. So many more comments. Do you guys, let me just continue. I
was about to say, we here all day now.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Like, we're already over, but people are chatting. People got stuff to say. People are going back and forth. This is good conversation. I'm just trying to, they're talking about lots of different things. Holly has posted some examples. Many people have posted some examples of systemic racism on here. All the different things that people are talking about, and I'm just trying to catch up what's happening. So to go ahead, you guys talk. I'm just trying to read because some of this stuff I'm so far behind on my comments.
I have my comments on.
Yeah, I think one thing too, to Dottie's point, Andy Mineo, I'm quoting Andy Mineo. Andy Mineo puts it so frank to what you just said: high opinions with low commitments. We cannot continue to allow this to happen in this day and age. You can speak on anything because you're not actually doing any action. Let's do some action, people. But let's make sure that the action that we do is funneled through the instructions and the obedience to Christ, not strictly ambition.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do we do Because part of what we've been talking about, an authentic lament, right? And I remember being in 2016, and I remember basically having people who voted for President Trump going to our church, and then there's people who feel like if you voted for President Trump, you're of the devil, right? So you got these two extremes on there. Where do we create truthful conversations where people can have honest opinions and honest thoughts about things like this that are so emotionally charged and emotionally driven, but they're also subjective in nature.
I think true relationships have to come through, or excuse me, true conversations have to follow true relationships.
Yeah.
Because it's so, and I love Brene Brown. She speaks about empathy. She speaks about how to actually get close to people. And one of her famous lines is hold hands with strangers. Because in holding hands with strangers, you put a face to this person, you put a background story to this person. He's just not a black man. He's just not a gay man. He's just not, she's just not a woman. I understand that, we have more in common than we have different. So before you can have those true, deep-hearted conversations, you have to seek true relationship, and not just to make your point known. You have to listen to hear, to become enlightened, not to listen to rebuttal.
So to Tina's point then, what you're saying, to Tina's point is there's no place for these conversations on Facebook Live because we don't really know each other. And so Tina, actually, you guys, this is going to be the last time that I'm ever going to do weekdays with the hottie, because Tina did not put me in step one. She put me in no steps. And so I
didn't. What I said was that this wasn't going to be solved in just a Facebook Live conversation, obviously. Yeah. And, when you're talking about where would these conversations happen, I know that they're happening, obviously, in our city groups and here at Blueprint. There's a whole network of church people, Christians, believers, Build a Bridge that Latasha Morrison founded. There are actual groups formed around racial reconciliation where Black and white people are having these conversations. Latasha Morrison's book, Build the Bridge, is a really good one because of, obviously, when we're talking about white rage, we're talking about white fragility, those are books. We're talking about how to be an anti-racist. Build the Bridge is specifically for Christians. It is written specifically around the issue of racial reconciliation and all of our roles in it. And it's Latasha Morrison. That's a great place to start as a believer, saying, okay, this is, a worldly conversation. That's a great Christian perspective on racial reconciliation and all of our roles in it. Followed up, obviously, with interpersonal relationship, with deep proximity, with conversations. And actual friends, so that I know we've been talking a lot about fatigue, and I had to catch myself doing this because it's exhausting. One of my white friends reached out to me, and she was like asking me all these questions, and I was like, I'm too tired for this. I can't have this conversation with you right now. I'm exhausted. I'm traumatized. Literally, when my son, he's severely autistic, and he is functionally and cognitively much younger, but he's 19 years old, but he is a Black man who is 6 feet 3 inches, and he's only partially verbal. I have been in Walmart before, and he's gotten out of my sight for a moment, and because he can't express himself and has odd sounds that he makes and odd behaviors that he has, I have had a police officer asking him to do certain things and he's not responding, and I walk in and see the police officer pulling his weapon out with my autistic son standing right there. All he sees is a Black man who is 6 feet 3 inches, who is not responding to what he's asking him to do. But I know this is an intellectually disabled man who cannot respond to what you're doing. I'm just, it's like hearing incidents like that, having honest conversations like that with your friends, and giving white people grace. Like, this might be an ignorant question. This might be a stupid question, giving them grace, not just rolling our eyes and saying, I can't do this right now, and throwing our hands up and saying, I'm exhausted, I can't. Because if we are actually friends, my friendship can stand under the weight of your learning. My friendship can withstand the fact that you are coming into this. And I am praying that God would give me patience so that we can have those honest conversations without me, being so hurt, because we are hurt, And the reason I said that is because we have fear. You know, even with COVID, it was a whole conversation about Black and brown men not wanting to wear masks in stores because they were being followed by police officers. You know, we feel hunted. We feel terrorized. We feel traumatized. And it's going to take for us as believers plugging into the Holy Spirit, plugging into our time with God for us to even be able to process that so we have something to give to our white brothers and sisters. Because otherwise, all we have is our own pain and our own fear and our own anger and our own fatigue.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Man, you guys, we could keep going. There's tons more comments. There's tons more things. Tina, they're asking you to do your own show. You know, this is what happens. This is what happens with what do they call with like Michael and Leave the Jacksons. They're already asking you. One show, they're already asking you to leave the Jacksons, Tina.
I'm with the Jacksons.
They're asking you to leave us already.
I'm just trying to play the bass in the background, just trying to be Tito.
That is so funny.
I'm Tito. I call Tito.
That is so funny. No, but I mean, there's so many people that are commenting on these things, and you know, and honestly, if you are in the thread, you see specifically this is being fleshed out with Michael on here on the thread because there's a guy named Michael on here, and people are not thinking that he's here to learn and all that. So, what do you guys do if you feel like you're getting in a debate with someone of the opposite race, of another race, if from someone of another race that you don't feel like is listening, right? And if we're having a conversation, you're strong about your opinions, they feel strong about their opinions, and you are trying to get. And let's assume that we're both trying to be sincere. Like and I know that that's even a big assumption, but none of us is God, and so none of us know the heart of humans. So we can't. So how do you, when you feel like a conversation is either not going anywhere or there's a rebuttal and we're rebuttaling back, how do you guys, what are some techniques, what are some practical things of addressing that type of conflict?
Yeah, I've had a lot of that because, again, as I've already said from my Facebook post, it's immediate politicized, the Democrat. I mean, immediate when I shared that. And what I have done is I will talk, and I will talk as much as I can. And then there comes a point where I'm like, you know what? I am not going to continue to cast my pearl before the swine. I'm not going to continue to try to convince you that this is a gospel issue. I'm not going to try to convince you that this is painful. There are many others who want to engage in conversation and want to understand and want to empathize. And that empathy does come, I believe, from the education and then trying to have some bit of a shared experience, even though you will never experience what I experienced. But they're at least trying, they're listening. And so for those who are combative and those who are not wanting to even sit at the table with me, I'm out. I don't have time for that. I am out because there are enough people. I don't have to validate my experience to you. I don't. So, but what I can try to do with those who are saying, listen, I want to understand. I had a friend literally call me. We didn't get to talk yet this past week. And we were in singles group together at another church. And she's a white young lady. And she's like, I want to understand what this white privilege means. Because I have a friend who says it's real. And I want to hear from, and I don't see it. I don't believe. Well, guess what? She's going to understand. If she gets to see this, she will hear. She will get some of the education and understand some of the experience to possibly have empathy and possibly see that it's real. But if she's like, I don't care, I don't want to see it, this is all farce, bye.
Well, let's differentiate. And let me ask you guys to differentiate a little bit. Because we said on here, relationship is key to having tough conversations, like especially secure relationships, right? Yeah. Relationships where as soon as I step on your toes and you step on my toes, we're not going to just leave one another, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we all can be stubborn and not necessarily would not hear one another, right? How do we both create conversations where we're not threatening to always leave? Tough conversations where we're disagreeing because we obviously are at an impasse, in a lot of ways, in a lot of areas, to kind of generalize the conversation. How can we be committed to the fight, but at the same time, like, you know, the idea of trying to say is, okay, if you say one stupid thing, I'm going to go. Or if you say multiple stupid things, I'm going to go because you ain't trying to learn. Like, how do we balance that tension?
Yeah, I think too. I think one thing that needs to be understood is that this conversation is just not happening between Black and white people.
Right.
Black people are having this conversation with Black people because if white supremacy is a system, which I absolutely believe it is, there are Black people that benefit from white supremacy or submit themselves to the system of white supremacy, and I have to have conversations with these people on ongoing. Black people are very diverse. We don't come from one background. We don't all meet on Tuesdays and, you know, come up with our agenda.
Hey, you missed it this week, though. You missed it this week.
Just touche. And so I think that when we have those conversations, one thing, because I know my tone, at this age, I know my tone. I know how I come off. I know that I sound very matter of fact. I know I state questions. So I always have to make the initiative. I always have to make the step to say, this is what my point is, and I'm trying to ask you for enlightenment's sake. Even if I don't see it that way, I'm asking you questions instead of just stating my opinion. And if we start with asking questions, even when we see Jesus modeled that perfectly. Jesus would ask people questions and let almost a Socratic method of questioning of, yo, what is this? What is this? How do you get here? And let people put themselves into these boxes and just say, all right, now how does that compare to the gospel? Yeah. And so for me, setting the baseline of, do you believe in the word of God is infallible? 2 Timothy 3:16. All right, then we can go from here as that's our baseline. Now, because of our experiences, because of our education, we're going to have different perspectives on it. But at the end of the day, all we coming back to is just the gospel, period, point blank. And I know, and I mean, trust me, I know throughout the years that I have met people that are like, well, this scripture means this scripture means that. I'm not even getting into that. I'm saying to have civil conversations, we have to have our foundation be the gospel. Because if I start going up on somebody, is that gospel? If I start to say that someone is stupid, is that gospel? I remember one day I was in our community group and I said something off cuff about Trump, President Donald Trump. And one of the guys in the group was like, yeah, I don't think ever talking about someone's character is godly. And so I had to sit there. Well, he said insulting someone's character, because talking about someone's character can absolutely be godly, but insulting someone's character. And I had to sit there with that for a minute and say, man, you're right. You know, like this isn't what God called me to do, because at the end of the day, if I believe that God is true, then this is his child too. And God is going after him just as much as he's coming after me. One sin is not bigger than the other. So for civil discourse, you have to understand that the Bible is foundation. You have to see that person as a person, and you have to ask questions, not for the sake of just trumping them, but for the sake of actually enlightenment. What's your background? How did you come to this conclusion?
Yeah, and I think that's really good. And being able to create those environments to have that, because to some degree, I mean, I think that's why, like in marriage, we all know that they're in marriage context, there are things, there's a commitment that I'm not going anywhere, right? And so that you can have you can have dialogue. And there's certain times where I'm listening and sometimes I'm not listening, and we're just, because of flesh and pride and all those things that are going. But hopefully, even in my worst moments, that my wife knows, Angie knows, that I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving you, and I'm not going to allow. But if we are so quick to say we're going to take our ball home and leaving because I'm having the same argument, Angie, that we've been having since year one in our marriage, like that's never a justifiable reason to leave the marriage, and doing it. And that's why at Blueprint, we have these. And that, despite what Tina says, that the reason why I have these environments is so that we can honestly talk and have these types of conversations, and we can put on display for people to disagree, but able to go back and say, well, we're not going anywhere. And that's another thing that we're planning on doing. Like, I think we're calling it the truth table, or, where over these the unity, let's call it the unity. I think the unity table, And Pastor Corwin is trying to devise a team of people that maybe for the next couple of weeks, for the next couple of weeks of just before getting on in small groups in a closed chat room so that we can have conversation and that we can have hard conversations and say we're not going anywhere. Because what oftentimes situations like this is that we are so prone to perform. But what it would look like if we were to get in smaller fight rooms, if we can call that, rooms that we can do it. And maybe even before Sunday service. So maybe from 10 to 10:50 or to 11 o'clock before we gather, that if you want to be a part of something like that, I mean, we're just throwing out ideas right now, but if you want to be a part of something like that, a unity table where we can get people in smaller chat rooms and then have authentic and honest conversations, that's what we have. We want to leverage. This is all about leveraging your platform, whatever God can, so that we can have model authentic lament in the face of injustice. And that's really what this whole series, has been about. And so being able to create that, I think we have to be able to model that in the body of Christ. But if we're going to model it, we got to be able to model disagreement. We can't just create rooms where everybody has groupthink and the whole mob mentality and where everybody's believing the same, thinking the same. Like, we have to be able to give people who think differently. Like, we need, to some degree, the Republican and the Democrat in the same room who strongly believe about their things. Go ahead.
And one thing I wanted to say to Hadi is that when there's a real difference between me getting on Facebook and going back and forth with a stranger, for an hour, debating this and walking away and saying this is not going to be productive or redemptive. Yeah. And me being in covenant relationship with another believer and saying the same way you did, because that's the essence of a covenant. I'm not going anywhere. So you can ask me, there's a vulnerability where you can feel free to voice questions with me that maybe in another environment you would be embarrassed to voice. So having that space and being able to do that. And the encouragement, I think, is, like I said, and you mentioned, I came up in my career initially in white evangelical, and again, that word makes me twitch a little bit, but in white evangelical environments where I was the only. Mm-hmm. When I was in AP classes in the 90s, in the 80s, because I'm in my 40s, I was the only. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and I was in these huge classes where, it's a majority white university. I was the only. I found myself consistently being in, and I think it's not happenstance. It was God training me on how to have these conversations, navigating microaggressions, people, good-hearted people who just didn't know, who had come up differently, who had lived differently. And the thing I will say is, when we made that commitment to each other, I'm not going to turn my back on you because you say something that's offensive, that you say something that's out of ignorance. Mm-hmm. As long as you understand that sometimes you were putting me in a position where I'm having to defend my own humanity, where I'm having to prove to you that I'm even human, which is something that is happening. When we see somebody, like a George Floyd murdered or whoever murdered, and we have to go back and say, oh, but he had a daughter, and he did this, and look at his parents. That is us having to defend, prove that person's humanity. No, this person is human. This person is just like you. That is us having to restore dignity to an image bearer when we shouldn't have to. So as long as I'm in that relationship, that covenant relationship with a white person, and you understand that there are times when it feels like you are putting me in a position where I'm having to defend my very humanity to you, and that is a difficult process for me. It's exhausting for me. We have that understanding on the other side of that. And I said, being the only one in all of those situations, some of my closest relationships are with white people with whom I've had to navigate those difficult conversations. Because just like in a marriage, sometimes when you have your biggest fights and you have your hugest disagreements and you have your hugest adversities, on the other side of that is intimacy. Is a depth to the relationship that you wouldn't have had if you didn't have to go through that. So I think this is a season where we as believers, if we navigate this properly, on the other side of this is an intimacy, is a deepening of our relationship and our understanding of each other, if we give each other space to do it, and we do it biblically, and we give each other what I was just saying is some of your
really
closest friendships couldn't be on the other side of this.
That's really good. That's really good. How do I, yes. And that's why one of the things that I'm like, there's so many questions, so many things that you just said, Tina, that just, how would us, and this, I'm gonna do it more in a question. How do you guys differentiate helpful conversations? We were talking about helpful versus harmful, right? A lot of what you were getting at, like some conversations are harmful, right? We get that. How would you guys talk about the difference between social media conversations and conversations that we're talking about within a church where genuine relationship can take place? What is beneficial for social media or what's not beneficial for social media? What's beneficial for church conversations like the church and what's not beneficial for conversation like, in a church environment, like what we're talking about in roundtables, in smaller group formats. I mean, how would you guys parse those two in terms of allowing people to engage appropriately?
I would say, personally speaking, all of my posts, which have led to conversations, have been conversations with people that the personal conversations, but they were because I posted something. And I don't know if it's just the time that we're in and a lot of people are talking about it, but I've had so many people reach out to me and say, I just want to hear from you. I want to hear your experience. That would not have happened if I didn't post certain things. Mm-hmm. And so, that's where the I guess the divisiveness comes in. Is it political or is it this or is it that? And a part of me has to decide the intent. I know what the intent is. The intent is for me to engage people that I would not be able to engage if I didn't post certain things. And if that's my intent, and the intent also is to allow people to see I'm a real person. And although, and I've heard this my whole life, you're the whitest black person I know, and you speak this way, and you act this way, and dress this way. At the end of the day, I'm still black. And what does that mean? It means I'm black. That's what that means. And because of that, there are things that I'm able to speak into and speak to for a lot of my white brothers and sisters that social media has allowed and afforded. And so I think it's individual to say there are certain things that you can't or shouldn't post. I think it's really individualized. There are certain things that I feel like I don't want to be a part of, so I will not post it. But there are things that I feel I'm very strongly in support of, and so I will post. And for the most part, they have led to very healthy conversation. Now, I don't know what people are saying behind my back and saying behind closed doors, but I know the conversations that I've had that have been so beneficial, and the hours long conversations. You leave the conversation and you're wore out, but you know that God has given you the right words to say, and He's given you the platform, and to the best of your ability, you want to use it, and it's one by one. So I would say I can't dictate or even define, is this acceptable? Is that acceptable? Is it? And I literally pray, God, is this going to be profitable at any standpoint? Mm-hmm. And if I believe it will, then God's given me the okay, then I'll post it.
Good. Do you guys have any other just like guiding principles of what you feel like needs to be a public conversation and what needs to be a private conversation or more interpersonal conversation?
Because I think whenever you start to attack, you need to take that offline. And when you're like, if you're giving general principles, of course, well, let me start from square root. If the Holy Spirit tells you to do this, if you feel clearance from the Lord to post. I can't say Pastor Durham was saying, I can't make a blanket statement for everyone. But when there's general education and when there's general knowledge, but when you're speaking specifically to a person, that's when I would say you need to take it offline. If you're calling out a specific person, take it offline and literally build with that person.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I really approach it in the sense, I was listening to Latasha Morrison, who is just brilliant on racial reconciliation, who hit the New York Times last week with her book, which congratulations to Latasha, which I've known Latasha literally since she was in college. So we're very good friends. But I was listening to Latasha talk about the remnant and understanding that every movement has a remnant. I understand there's a remnant that is going to get this on a heart level. And then there are people who never will. And I don't believe that God is calling me to convert every person who may hold racist views to anti-racism. That's not what he's calling me to do. But I think that he is calling me to figure out and to discern where are the relationships and it could be that a social media post leads to that, but to have those deeper conversations. But just understanding it's not our responsibility to convert every person who doesn't believe the way we do to our way of thinking. And that is more about being heard than being helpful. That's another guide is, do I just want to be heard or do I want to be helpful? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times the posting, not for everybody, but sometimes the posting is I want to be heard. And those conversations may be where it's actually helpful.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the guiding principles for me. Do I want to be heard or do I want to be helpful?
That's good.
And which category does what I'm doing right now, which category would it fall into?
Yeah, and oftentimes I talk about the idea of speaking the truth in love. The believer is always called to speak the truth in love, and then in speaking the truth in love, there are going to be things that hurt others, and it's okay. That is okay to be hurt by someone, but the goal of these conversations are not being harmful, right? Harmful is when I go with the intent of trying to harm you, and to Tina's point, just so that I can be heard, and I think that is a great, delineation and distinction that we have. Man, I mean, goodness, we've been going for an hour, you guys. This is kind of officially the longest show that I've had, but people are still on and people are still asking questions. A few more moments, so let's kind of get through a couple of more of these, and then we'll let you guys. I really do appreciate you guys staying on and engaging this thoughtful conversation. So again, they're just talking about the tension and like how to create safe spaces and everything. Hey, at the Black people meeting, this is Sam Dula, your husband. You're only allowed 3 unexcused absences per quarter. So this is what your husband said, Tina. So I just want you to just want you to know. And by the way, Dedrick is on all the way supporting you from another country, and he's already put you as Tina for president. So I don't know if he's going to do absentee ballot.
I was going to say he's in Dubai.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
it's not going to do as much good. No, thank you.
The absentee ballot. Dedrick, go ahead to me. That's it. And actually, Dedrick, you guys got to send a shout out and a thumbs up to Dedrick. Dedrick was one of the original musicians for Blueprint Church, and so a lot of things unheard, unspoken, but grateful for you and for what you're doing out there. All right, Keena says, this panel is fruitful and impartial. Thanks to all 3 guests for your input, honestly, and filtering your honesty through truth. Thanks to Hadi for facilitating the discussion. So basically what Keenan is saying is that this meeting in Facebook is not meaningless, Tina.
I didn't say it,
Ernest says, uncomfortable questions do not equate to being combative. Thank you, Pastor Hadi, for addressing the issue of the conversation. Patricia says, this is amazing. I'm learning so much. Our 12-year-old son is Black. I went out by myself to protest in our tiny white town the day after James Floyd was murdered. I felt so much rage. I didn't know what to do. My husband and I have been in constant conflict since then. He does not want to see what the truth really is, because he doesn't want Biniam to grow up in that world. It's been so hard to see how racist so many people I know. You know what's interesting is that there are so many white people. Like I was driving down, if on Ponce de Leon, and it turns into like Decatur, the time where you go, and it's pretty much none of us are in that area. But what was interesting is that I saw so many of the majority culture out protesting, like on the side of the streets, like, and you could tell, like, it wasn't people who marched there, that you could tell that they were residents of there, like taking on, there was not a minority amongst any of them, and so just to see this taking place, this conversation, I think that is showing that we're seeing more empathy taking place. They're seeing more empathy taking place. And what I grieve is that specifically, and this is to the church as a whole, and I'm not talking white church, but I'm just to the church as a whole. if NASCAR is willing to lose money, revenue, fan, and participation by addressing systemic racial issues and doing it in a very matter-of-fact way, and I understand it took them a long time, and we can go through all that, but at this point, right now, they are willing to address it in a real way. Church, please, let's stop talking about whether or not stuff is racist or not. Like, I mean, please. The bottom line is that we gotta, like, clearly, concisely, definitely, prophetically denounce racism at its core. We can't keep debating and justifying all the things. It's like, man, right? And that's what we've been talking about. Systemic racism is this, that's what it is. It's systemic, and it's impacting everyone. You know, and what we're seeing now is the impact of what we've seen in 2020. Is this basically has allowed us to see that we cannot keep things quarantined, right? Yeah. And what I mean by that is this: Martin Luther King said, "Injustice in one place is injustice every place," right? And what we thought was coronavirus was an issue that was a foreign problem, right? It didn't come into America until what? You know, March was when our first case was, February, March, where we had the first case. And now America is the largest, you know, people who have been impacted by it, because it was somebody else's problem. Yeah. But now when it came to America, it is our problem. And what my plea to the church is, not only have we been complicit, we are some of the perpetuators of racism in our systems, in our institutions. And part of it is because we're defending a system that has been clearly systemically racist in so many different ways. So we need to stop arguing about those types of things. You can still vote Republican, and it's okay. You can still vote Democrat, and it's okay. But let's call sin, sin. Let's call racism, racism. Let's start doing and stop kind of trying to, you know, fight for something or, you know, deflect the real issues that we're seeing. And that's ultimately my cry out to everyone. I know we got so many more comments, but I'm gonna let you guys go. I do appreciate you. I appreciate where we are. And this is our cry out. And I thank you for you prophets coming on and declaring the word of God, declaring your heart, declaring and exposing systemic injustices, because that's the truth. And we need to now mobilize as a church together. We need to mobilize together, and we need to solve the systemic injustice, the systemic racism that's going on. And so we just really, I'm pleading to us as a church and Blueprint Church, we need to begin to think tangibly, continue to think tangibly of what we need to do as a church. And that's a call from me as your pastor to you, to all of us, is that just like, please fill up my inbox. I am searching, desiring for tangible ideas for us to do. Please email me, Dhati, DHATI, @blueprintchurch.org. Please fill up my inbox. I want to know, because we have an elders meeting literally in the next hour. I want to bring these things, these solutions, these problems. Let's create vision and not just simply anti-vision. Like, what is our preferred future? What is our preferred future? And let's begin to target that, and let's aim. Let's mobilize as a church in order to do that. And so I love you guys, Blueprint. Tina, Derwin, Chris, thank you. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for staying on extra. You guys, please forward this conversation. This is great conversation that people need to be heard. Honest conversation, honest dialogue. They need to read the comments. All of those things. We're going to be chopping this up, especially what Tina, we're gonna omit some of the stuff Tina said on here, but everything else, we are going to make sure that we are promoting it. Now, seriously, Tina, you know I love you. I appreciate you.
You mentioned that.
I appreciate you guys. Be listening soon for some truthful, honest conversation. And if you are interested, email Corwin, Corwin, at blueprintchurch.org. If you are interested of thinking creative ways to having small group tables before service or anything, email him, Corwin at blueprintchurch.org, and we'll be able to consider different ways and different ways to address this. We love you guys. We appreciate you. Until next time, see you later. Peace.